Here's something a lot of us have been waiting for quite a while. A job site portable table saw from SawStop. Let's look at some of the features on the new SawStop saw and do a little comparison with the Bosch table saw, one of the tools we've all been depending on for years. And the first thing I want to start with is comparing the sound levels. For some of you that have a Bosch table saw, you know when you put your fence on, you got to make sure you hook the back of it and hook it just right, or it won't sit down flat on the table. I'm going to have to let it go, and there we go. Now it's flat on the table. The SawStop's a little bit different. With the SawStop fence, all you have to do is set it down anywhere you want, push the button, and it's locked down. Now, the SawStop saw has an extension table just like the Bosch. You release the lock, slide it out, and you can rip pretty wide material past the center of a sheet of plywood. But if you want to move the fence in, unlike the Bosch, you can take the fence and bring it inside, lock it down, and still have support for your stock when you're ripping, because they've included this really useful support for mid-span ripping. And with the SawStop saw, they also include a really cool little toolbox. So you can store all of your accessories in here, the miter gauge, the riving knife and fence, everything you need for the saw, even the directions for the saw are kept inside this little toolbox. And there's storage for the fence too. And not only does the fence store underneath the saw really well, but you can lock it in there too, real easy. So the SawStop has a kind of similar crank handle for raising the blade as the Bosch saw does, but watch this. One turn, it says, and they're serious. One turn raises the blade all the way up. There's no multiple turns, especially like with the DeWalt saw, where you have to turn it like 20 times to get the blade to come up. One turn up, one turn down. So if the blade goes up and down that fast, it's got to make you wonder how accurate is it when you're lifting the blade. The blade lift mechanism is plenty sensitive. You can easily dial it in to a 32nd of an inch and even a 64th of an inch if you're that particular. The bevel lock is similar to the Bosch too, but on the SawStop, all you do is squeeze the back handle and pull it to the angle you want to cut a bevel at. And if you want to change the bevel angle minutely, you can do it with this microfine adjustment knob. But if you're looking to buy a SawStop saw, this is what you're really going to be interested in. This is the on-off paddle. It's a paddle. You can shut it off real quick with your knee if you have to, but it's not the on-off switch. This is the on-off switch. And like a SawStop bench saw or a cabinet shop, you turn it on the same way. Turn the switch on, and you'll get a red light at first while the saw is just coming up to code. It's checking to make sure that there's nothing inhibiting the electronics on the saw before you get the solid green light. Now you will get a red light if there is something inhibiting the program. It could be that you got a piece of wood still touching a saw blade, or your metal square will shut off, will give you an error light here. There are several reasons you can get a red status light. If you touch the blade, you'll definitely get one instantly. There's a chart right on the side of the saw that shows all the different status lights you can get and what the cause of those problems could be. The throat guard on the SawStop saw is really similar to the Bosch saw. It has these small Allen screws that you can use to adjust it so it's perfectly flush with the surrounding tabletop on the saw. But it also has a little spring-loaded lock so it won't fall out even when you're transporting the saw. We'll crank up this blade, and to release the riving knife, just lift up on the lever right here, pull the riving knife out. Nothing could be easier. And here's where the action really happens on a SawStop saw. If your finger touches the blade, this aluminum block is driven right into the teeth of the blade, and the motor drops down below the top of the tabletop instantly. Here's what I'm talking about. This is a blade we were using to rip foam insulation 4-inch thick with metal on both sides, and we forgot to turn on the bypass switch. And this is what will happen. Drove the aluminum block right into the blade, ruined the block, but that's what the saw is supposed to do. If the blade contacts anything that changes the electrical current passing through it, the safety system activates. Yeah, you'll have to replace the brake in the blade, but the brake costs only $69, which is a lot less than a finger or a hand. If you want to avoid some serious downtime, make sure you've got a spare blade and a spare brake whenever you use your saw. So this is your standard 10-inch blade with the standard brake inside for a narrow blade. Now if you're going to use a dado blade, make sure you get the dado brake for it. The dado brake is much wider, so it'll grab the whole blade, whereas the standard brake is pretty narrow, so it'll just grab a single blade. I use a dado set like this in my portable table saw all the time, so I make sure I have 2 of these handy, just in case. Blade wrenches are stored on the back of the saw too, but a little differently than you see on most saws. Instead of having some silly wing nut that you got to spin over and over again, there's a really nice quick release here, so you can pull your wrenches off and put them back on and never lose them. And these are some serious blade wrenches. This is what we were talking about earlier. Okay, so the big question you're going to probably be asking is, how does the SawStop compare to the Bosch saw when it comes to power? Let's check that out. Hey, you probably noticed I was pushing that piece of 2x through there pretty hard. I was trying to see if the saw had bogged down just to give it a good test. And it won't bog down. These portable table saws are pretty powerful. Now they're not designed to push 2x through them all day long, but they can cut it if you need to. Now let's push this piece of 2x through that saw and see how fast the SawStop cuts 2x. The power's about the same. This saw is just a little bit slower, just a tiny bit, but really, what do you expect when you're cutting a knotty piece of 2x like this? We got most of the sawdust, but the Bosch saw doesn't get it all. There's like no sawdust in here underneath this saw at all. And that's because the dust collector isn't open underneath the SawStop saw the way it opens up underneath the Bosch saw, just a little bit. Now you saw some dust that came off the blade as we were cutting, and that threw sawdust off the top of the blade out to the back of the saw, but all table saws are going to do that to you. The tabletop measures 31.5 by 25.75, and the Bosch table saw measures 29 by 25.25. The Bosch saw is a little bit smaller than the SawStop saw, but I wouldn't be surprised if you've got your heart set on putting your saw into a Rousseau stand. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Rousseau came out with a stand for this saw really soon. In the meantime, you should check out the way this thing folds up. It's pretty quick. The stand on the SawStop saw is super easy to fold up and fold out too. Just step down on the release, lift it up, and you're ready to go. And to fold it back out, step on the release again, and fold it down. It's that simple. No doubt about it. This saw is going to cost you twice as much as any other portable table saw. But look what you get from it. High quality, durability, and peace of mind.